안녕하세요. 이 강의에 오신 것을 환영합니다. I am Kiano with the ARP, and I would like to welcome you to our program this evening. ARP Virginia is thrilled to be collaborating with Usher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University to bring our members a sampling of the rich program offered by OLLI Mason each semester.
Greetings from the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. OLLI Mason has been around for over 30 years, serving curious individuals who participate in lectures, clubs, trips, and special events, as well as volunteer opportunities such as teaching and service on committees. I want to welcome all of our OLLI Mason members, as well as those of you who are in Virginia and across the United States online through our AARP connection. I want to especially welcome our sister campus, Mason, Korea. We are very happy to be collaborating with Mason, Korea to bring this Live from Korea series to you. There are many things you can learn and do at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University, and I encourage you to visit our website to learn more, olli.gmu.edu. Thank you and enjoy the presentations.
Hi, I'm Mark Ginsberg, George Mason University's Provost and Executive Vice President, and greetings from George Mason University, Korea, where I am today in beautiful Sangdo and Incheon, South Korea. It's a pleasure to encourage you to take part in and participate in Live from Korea. You know, George Mason University and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute have a long-time partnership. And this new program that brings together people from our campus in Incheon and Sangdo, South Korea, and provides an opportunity for our colleagues from OLLI to learn about some of the issues in Korea, some of the cultural heritage and wonderful experiences that people have had in Korea, and to participate in and learn about the importance of the relationships between the United States and South Korea. George Mason in Korea is an important campus, an integral and related experience that our students have the opportunity to participate in. And I know that you too will benefit from, enjoy, and have the opportunity to learn about these important relationships. I hope you enjoy Live from Korea.
Greetings. I'm Robert Matz, Dean of George Mason University's campus in Korea. Mason Korea and Mason OLLI are delighted to collaborate to bring you this series, Live from Korea. Today's presenter is Gyu Tag Lee. His is the second of two presentations on South Korea culture and, alas, the final presentation in this series. Dr. Lee will be discussing the Korean musical genre known as K-pop as both a Korean and a global phenomenon. Dr. Lee received his PhD in Cultural Studies from George Mason University in 2013. He has been teaching on George Mason's Korea campus since 2014. He is an expert on popular music, media studies, the globalization of culture, and especially K-pop. He is also one of the go-to authorities in the Korean press regarding K-pop and other forms of Korean popular media. Let me tell you a little bit about Mason Korea. Students who apply directly to Mason Korea spend 3 years here and then a year at our Fairfax campus or one of our other Northern Virginia campuses. Students who go to George Mason in the US can also come to Mason Korea for study abroad for either a semester or a year. If you'd like to learn more about Mason Korea, including opportunities for students to study here or possibilities for supporting scholarships for Mason Korea students, please go to our website at www.masonkorea.gmu.edu. That's www.masonkorea, all one word, .gmu.edu. And now, on to our presentation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Lee.
Right. 안녕하세요. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gyu Tag Lee, and as being introduced by our academic dean, Dr. Dean Matt, Dr. Robert Matt. I have been like teaching some Korean pop culture, media studies, and popular music industries here in Mason, Korea, Songdo since 2014. So today I would like to give you a brief, actually it is a brief because the theme that I will cover today is actually kind of the one semester theme, not just like this 1.5 hour class, but I will try to make kind of brief introduction about Hallyu and K-pop, which some of you may not really familiar with. I do not exactly know how many people are aware of like Hallyu or K-pop, since this is a kind of very recent cultural phenomenon. So I hope today's class can give you some kind of some clue about understanding this new cultural phenomenon, uh, which has been going on for like more than a decade all over the world. So from now on, I will share my material, the PowerPoint slide material with you for a better discussion. Right, so as you can see from this slide, the title slide, today's theme of this class is mostly about Hallyu and K-pop. Although Dean Matt introduced my class is about K-pop, I would like to make kind of more kind of broader general discussion about Hallyu and along with the K-pop thing. So as you can see here, this is my introduction page from our Mason Korea campus web page, and I got my bachelor's and master's degree from Seoul National University and my PhD degree from George Mason University Cultural Studies Department, mostly focusing on globalization of pop culture, especially music industry and popular music. And one of my main research theme is about Hallyu and K-pop, which will be discussed today. And thanks to the big popularity of Hallyu and K-pop these days, especially since the early 2010, I have been quoted in many different media, having been interviewed by many local and global media, just like you can see here from the slide. Of course, it is not because I have been so great, but because Hallyu and K-pop has been so successful these days, especially outside this domestic market, South Korea. So first of all, I would like to talk about this term Hallyu, the cultural phenomenon Hallyu, because many of you have even not have heard this term Hallyu. So before talking about this definition of Hallyu or what the more like detailed information about Hallyu, I would like to show a video clip from one of the most famous K-pop boy band, whose name is BTS. This video that I am showing was from the Grammy Awards this year, a few months ago. Some of you have heard about BTS, some of you have not, but this is the song called Butter, which was on the very top of the Billboard single chart last year in 2021 for like several consecutive weeks, that 10 weeks or something. As you can see from the video, although this song is in English, most of their song, BTS and other K-pop bands, boy bands and girl bands, their song are mostly in Korean. And interesting thing you can find here is that this performance, the very intro of this performance on the Grammy stage, you can see that they actually use some like scenes or some images from the film James Bond, right? And also the music style that you can hear, it's not really the thing that you can expect from Korean traditional culture. or ethnic culture. Rather, it is more the very disco or funky pop music that you have heard before from American pop music or other global pop dance music, right? But this is performed by like non-Western, non-American, but Korean musician from East Asia, which makes this very global type of dance music a bit different from the typical dance music or typical pop music that you can hear from American music industry or global music industry. Actually, that is one of the very important characteristics of Hallyu and K-pop, that it is the Korean culture, but not the Korean traditional culture or ethnic Korean culture than you can expect, or you can expect from like you can expect. Rather, it is more about the very contemporary, modern pop culture that they have performed, that they have shown to the global audience, which have been successfully drawing attention from the global audience. Yes, BTS has been a great, although they made a public announcement that they will go on hiatus for like a couple of years. Yes, as you can see from this photo on the slide, they have been on the cover of the Time magazine, considered as the one of the next generation leaders that you can see here. And not only this popular music, but other pop culture or media products such as TV series or films or variety shows also have been popular among some global audience, which is also a big part of Hallyu. So some of you have watched this TV series, and not the TV series because it was exclusively shown on the Netflix rather than on TV, which is Squid Game last year, and the Parasite, the film directed by Bong Joon-ho, the Korean, one of the very famous Korean director, got several international film awards, including Oscar. Also the year before last year. So you can see that music, TV series, or usually called as the K-drama, and also the film has been leading this new culture phenomenon, and both other kinds of Korean culture also has been going global these days. So now I will talk about this term Hallyu. I have been using the term Hallyu since the very beginning of today's class, and some of you may wonder what is Hallyu. Before the term Hallyu was actually introduced as the English translation Korean wave, which was the direct translation from this Korean word Hallyu. Here, Han means Korean, Ryu means wave. So when we call this cultural phenomenon as Korean wave, this is only the very direct translation from the Korean term Hallyu to the English. But recently, the term Hallyu even has been added to the Oxford English Dictionary with other new words from Korean culture, which means that now this term Hallyu is becoming more of the general or universal term used by many people, especially from academia and from media and others who are interested in this cultural phenomenon. It shows now people who are interested in this cultural phenomenon may not need any English translation to Korean wave. What I mean here is that now people come to use Hallyu, the term, more often rather than the English translation Korean wave, because it is becoming bigger than before. I can make these kinds of situations, such as like Japanese food, sushi. I believe that almost all of you have tasted sushi, or even you are not big fan of this sushi food, you know what sushi is, right? And you do not have any English translation about this term sushi, which is Japanese food, which may, if you want to translate this sushi into English, then you may have to explain that this is a food kind of rice with raw fish or something like that. But you don't need any explanation about sushi because not you know what it is. Although the sushi, the term actually originated from Japanese word. Hallyu is actually following the very path, just like sushi, uh, uh, just like sushi did, because now it is becoming a proper name, widely known and understood by many different people who are interested in, especially who are interested in this cultural phenomenon. So I would, from now on, if you, after having this class today, I suggest you to use the term Korean wave or Hallyu when you talk about Korean culture. And I actually, some of my students from United States use the term Hallyu wave, but as you can see here, the term Hallyu wave might not be like perfectly correct because Hallyu itself contains the meaning of wave. So if you say Hallyu wave, it is just like saying Korean wave. So you can say Korean wave or you can say Hallyu, but not Hallyu wave. Anyway, the term Hallyu actually was made firstly by Chinese media and the audience at uh, at the end, the late 1990. We are going to see that later why it was made by Chinese media and why it was in the late 1990s. So firstly, it was made by Chinese media audience, then other East Asian media and audience you began to use this term since the late 1990 and the early 2000. Interesting thing I would like to point out here again, another interesting thing that I would like to point out here is that although there has been a big popularity of American pop culture, such as Hallyu films or American pop music, but there has been a no term such as American wave or Midyu, which also means American wave in its own term in Chinese or in Korean. The reason that there is a term such as Korean wave or Hallyu, but no American wave or Midyu is because it is such an exceptional case. I mean, the popularity of American pop culture all over the world might not be so surprising, might not be so exceptional because the history of the popularity of American pop culture over the world is like kind of like almost more than a century, right? But especially for non-Western, non-English based culture, such as Korean pop culture from like East Asia, it is very rare case for those non-English based and non-Western culture becoming global, becoming popular outside this domestic market and all over the world. This is the reason that this cultural phenomenon, the popularity of Korean culture, has been given a very special proper name, which is Hallyu or Korean wave, and has been studied not only by the local Korean media scholars or Korean cultural studies scholar, but also by many global academia. So now you can see the meaning of the Hallyu, which is Korean wave, and why is it so exceptional among all the cultural phenomenon going global. So Hallyu can be simply defined as the global cultural phenomenon that Korean media and cultural products has become enjoyed and loved by the global audience. But as I told you at the very beginning of today's class, this is not the Korean traditional culture or ethnic Korean culture that you can expect from like non-English based and non-Western countries. Rather, it is more of the Korean contemporary pop culture or the media product rather than these ethnic or traditional culture that has been successfully globalized. But these days, especially, recently, popular culture enjoyed and loved by the global audience is becoming a kind of the gateway to other Korean culture, which means that many people who come to fall in love with Korean pop culture, such as K-pop or Korean TV series or Korean films, also come to have interest in other kinds of Korean culture, such as Korean food, Korean cosmetic, or the Korean style of makeup, usually called as the K-beauty, or the very Korean education system, which have some like positive bright side and dark side, and also like Korean language and history. I can see that many like fans of Hallyu is beginning to learn Korean language, how to read it and how to speak with it, because just like I mentioned in K-pop or other Korean TV series, Korean languages are used by actors, actresses, singers, and musicians. So it is very natural for them who have interest in Hallyu decide to learn Korean language to understand the culture better. So in my college, George Mason, Korea, many students from, of course, from Fairfax and even, but also from other like university come to learn Korean language as well as Korean culture. And in other Korean universities, there are more and more international students coming to Korea to learn Korean history, Korean language, and Korean culture, which is kind of a very new phenomenon for South Korean educational institutions. But I should note here one thing that has been misunderstood by many people, that Hallyu or the global success of Korean pop culture has been organized and made by the government intentional plan. Actually, it is not. It is true. It is true that the very rapid growth of Korean economy have been organized or have been planned by the Korean government, such as the Korean Economic Development Plan, etc. The government-led plan. But this cultural success made by Korean media industry, called Hallyu, has not been actually made by government plan or government support. I was asked by some international scholars when participating in international conference about K-pop and Hallyu that how much money Korean culture industry have received from Korean government to make their culture globalized or to promote their culture kind of thing. But it is one of the big misunderstanding by some global academia and media. Actually, it has been, of course, made by the effort or the competence by Korean culture industry, the private sectors. But also, I should say that the very global success, at first, in the beginning, it was not made by the detailed intentional plan. Rather, the very global success actually began by accident, very accidentally, though after that the accident success, Korean private company have tried to use this very lucky success to be continued longer than expected. First, Hallyu began as an international global phenomenon in East Asia since the late 1990s. The very popularity of Hallyu in East Asia, I mean the Korean pop culture in East Asia, has been still continued until present. So it has been almost like 25 years, quarter century, that Korean pop culture has been so media products have been so famous, so popular in this East Asian region. I should show this map first to talk about East Asia. I believe that many of you know the very, geographical territory of East Asia, but usually here in South Korea and in many other many other countries such as China or Japan, East Asia usually is like described as the big country, China, of course, Japan, two Korea, South Korea, North Korea, and like Hong Kong, Taiwan, etc. But what I mean here in this lecture by East Asia includes two different East Asia, which is Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. So this map, you can see how East Asia can be described here rather than like only small part of Northeast Asia. So yes, this is the big East Asia. And what I mean by East Asia is the certain part of a big Asian continent. So Hallyu was first became popular first in East Asia, and it has almost like quarter century, 25 years, which means that the very popularity of Hallyu is kind of longer than you might expect. I know that 25 years is not a very long when we see from historical perspective, right? But a particular culture has been popular more than 2 decades, even 25 years or longer. We will not say it is just a temporary fad, right? Rather, we should say that it is kind of the regional culture, which means the culture not from their local cultural industry, but also not from the global or global cultural industry, but somewhere between local and global, which is the very regional culture, or and has been understood as the culture of East Asia by many East Asian people. And also in East Asia, different from in the United States or other like Western countries, it has been a culture not only for younger generation, but also for older generation in their 40s or even 50s or older. Because when they were young in the late 1990s, they were fans of Korean pop music or Korean TV series, etc. And now they become older and gave birth to their child, and their child is give birth to their children, or their children is now becoming teenagers and adults. And now in East Asia, it is very common for them to enjoy Korean pop culture together with their parents and children. So for many East Asian people, it is not the culture only from foreign country, South Korea. Rather, it is a culture of their own as an East Asia, because we will see that later, but in many, for example, in many K-pop bands, there are not only Koreans, but also many East Asian from China, Taiwan, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. also member of those East Asian, those K-pop bands. And also it is very common for East Asian people to enjoy Korean culture, not only via internet, not only via like subscription-based intermedia platforms such as Netflix, but they even can enjoy those TV those products even from their cable network or even nationwide TV network, which is very different from American case. But then how about Hallyu outside East Asia? While there is a kind of longer history of Hallyu in East Asia, Hallyu outside East Asia has kind of the relatively a newer phenomenon compared to the Hallyu in East Asia, because it has become visible and significant since the late 2000s. So it has been a decade or a bit more since Korean pop culture or globalization of Korean pop culture, which is Hallyu, became significant. And it is still mostly the cultural phenomenon among younger generation, which means that some of you may not really be familiar with this Korean pop culture, Korean TV series, or like K-pop thing. But these young generation have been so famous as being really exceptional, being really loyal to their K-pop musicians and Korean products. There are many reasons for that, and I will briefly talk about this issue, but this exceptional loyalty to the Korean pop culture by those global younger generation has become a big and strong fan base to support the Hallyu phenomenon in all over the world, and they has been playing a role of word of mouth to promote Hallyu or promote K-pop without like being paid by like Korean government or Korean private companies, etc. It is kind of the very participatory culture made by those younger generations. I would like to briefly talk about K-pop because I may need like more like a couple of hours to talk about K-pop in detail. I have used the term K-pop so far, and some of you have heard the term K-pop, but I should say, first of all, I should say one thing about K-pop is that K-pop is not the every kinds of Korean popular music. Of course, K-pop is the term like based on combination between Korean pop or Korean pop music. But just like pop music in the United States will not mean every kinds of American popular music, right? There is a pop genre such as rock, jazz, hip hop, blues, R&B, etc., right? And just like that, K-pop is not the Korean popular music as a whole. Rather, also in Korean popular music, there are different kinds of genres such as like rock, hip hop, R&B, jazz, pop ballad, and even other Korean traditional genres such as trot, etc. And K-pop is one of those popular musical genres from Korean popular music rather than all kinds of Korean popular music. So simply speaking, we cannot say every Korean popular music as K-pop. Then what is K-pop? Actually, the term K-pop even did not exist. Just like the term Hallyu, it did not exist until the late 1990s. There was no term such as Hallyu, and there was no term such as K-pop until the late 1990s. But it was also firstly named by East Asian audience and media such as Chinese media, Hong Kong media, and Taiwanese media in the late 1990s, just like the case of Hallyu. That when they made kind of the TV programs broadcasting Korean music video named as K-pop station kind of thing. So it was kind of the newly created word in the late 1990s when it became internationally known outside its domestic market, Korea, I mean the overseas. Just like the Hallyu, the K-pop also was created by others rather than Koreans themselves. And it was actually a part of Hallyu phenomenon in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And it was not that big until the mid 2000s, although it was like internationally, some of the K-pop musicians were internationally successful in East Asia. Interesting thing I would like to note here is that the term K-pop, although it was created and came to be used by East Asian audience and media, it was not fully accepted by Korean themselves until the late 2000s. There were many reasons for that, but one of the most important reasons among others was that I will talk about it later, but when firstly Hallyu became significant in East Asia and K-pop became popular in East Asia, not many people in Korea, South Korea here, did not believe that the popularity of Korean media products or K-pop would last long. They couldn't believe that the popularity of Korean pop culture overseas actually exists, interestingly. So it only came to be used since the late 2000s when this new music genre, K-pop, came to be known even outside East Asia, but also in other countries and other regions such as United States, some Western European countries, Latin Americas, etc. So we can see here that K-pop as a genre or musical genre have been defined not by Korean themselves, but mostly by the international or global success, which means that some kinds of Korean popular music that have been enjoyed and loved by international audience has been called K-pop. So the definition of K-pop is closely related to the global awareness or global recognition of certain style of Korean popular music rather than all kinds of Korean popular music. And also, it is not directly related to musical style. If you are interested in K-pop or if you have heard some K-pop music, such as the songs from the BTS or song from Blackpink or Twice, you may have your own image about K-pop, that there are like boys and girls, like not only just 2 or 3, but like many boys and girls on the stage performing like very complicated dynamic dance on the stage. Most of them are like electronic dance music, and it may be true that most of K-pop music has been kind of dance music, but other than dance music, there have been some rock bands and there have been some even acoustic folk musician or hip hop musician who are also considered as K-pop. Most of the reason why they are considered as K-pop, although they are not doing dance music, is because they also have been successful in international market and named by global audience as K-pop. But it shows the very ambiguity of the K-pop as a genre, depending upon the international awareness or international success, not made by its internal musical characters or musical style. So K-pop as a genre cannot be easily defined or understood only by the musical aspect alone, though there is certain tendency that should be aligned with the global music trend. So, I mean, when you think about jazz, for example, there are certain musical style that can be considered as jazz music style or jazz musical aspect. But K-pop cannot only be described in those musical aspects. Whether there are many other aspects such as music about global, like the global trendiness or choreography, the very unique choreography, usually called as gunmu here in South Korea, which means group dancing, and fashion style, which also makes K-pop musicians very different from musicians from other country. And this is one of the very interesting point, that the music video with certain unique aesthetics has been considered as the characteristics of K-pop, that when a musician, for example, when an un-American musician produce very like extrovert and certain kinds of music video very similar to K-pop, his or her music video will be considered as K-pop style rather than others, which means that now these kinds of visual images such as dance or music video has been considered very important in the identity of K-pop. And the other thing I would like to point out here is the business model that K-pop musicians have been trained, educated, and even managed and controlled by their entertainment agency based on their contract, even before making their debut, which makes K-pop musicians, usually called as idol, very different from the typical musicians that you can imagine. Yes, they have their own will, they have their own musical or artistic will, but it is also like, it should be discussed and it should be managed and it should be controlled sometimes by the entertainment agency, not the not the very typical record label, but agency who are doing almost everything for them. So it's called this the total management strategy. And there are other like things that you can see what makes K-pop different from other genres. And I'm telling you that it is not really easy to talk about what the K-pop is if you are not really familiar with the K-pop, but it is more of the style or the broader culture rather than just the musical genre, which means that all kinds of aspects that I'm showing here with this slide will be a part of K-pop. And if you say that I'm enjoying K-pop, it means that you just not enjoy listening to the music, but enjoying all kinds of things that is described. And it is based on the active participation from the audience rather than passively listening to music or only going to concert, etc. So this is the reason that K-pop is kind of the new culture, different from other musical genre. So far, I have discussed definition of Hallyu, what is Hallyu, and the brief history of Hallyu in East Asia and outside East Asia. And I also talked about the definition of K-pop also in brief. From now on, I would like to talk about the history of Hallyu from first generation to third generation since the late 1990s. The reason that I would like to talk about this history of Hallyu is to let you know that even before the big success in the United States and in the Western countries or overseas, the international success of Hallyu had a kind of longer history, and it has become kind of the basis for the broader like global success since the mid 2010. So just like I mentioned previously, Hallyu actually began in the late 1990s, mostly in East Asia, especially the Chinese-speaking region, such as mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. So those countries and those regions have been kind of the very important fan base for Hallyu phenomenon, K-pop, and others as well. And other East Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and Philippines, among others, also came to be the big fan base of the Hallyu since the late 1990s and the early 2000s. Different from like today's big popularity of Hallyu, it was mostly the TV series, these days usually called as the K-drama. Actually, the term drama here in South Korea is a bit different from the drama that that is used in America. In American usage, it is usually called as a TV series rather than just called drama. But here in South Korea and Japan, in China and other East Asian country, drama or dorama may mean the American style TV series. So now it is called as K-drama. But anyway, this Korean TV series became popular among others earlier than other cultural products, followed by music and film. At that time in East Asia, and still, the Hallyu is not only the cultural phenomenon limited in the cyberspace or internet-based media. Rather, it has been more of the very broader and generally consumed by larger audience by their cable networks or TV networks. And still, if you visit any East Asian countries, then you can see, in the hotel or others, you can see many Korean TV dramas still are aired by many East Asian TV network. So you can watch Korean TV series on TV. It is not really surprising, and it is very common that you can common experience that you can enjoy in East Asian countries, although many Korean TV series have been dubbed in their own language. The primary audience for this Hallyu phenomenon at the time in East Asia was mostly between teens and 20s, just like the case in the United States or other countries these days. But interestingly, in Japan, there are some older females also came to fall in love with the Hallyu, especially the TV series, which is very unique case because there are certain characteristics that could appeal to those older female in Japan comparing to other countries, that they actually focused or concentrated on some other aspect from Korean TV series or Korean culture, different from other countries. Also, as I told you previously, at the time when Hallyu firstly began as a part of East Asian cultural phenomenon since the late 1990 and the early 2000s, not many people, of course, here in South Korea and also in East Asian countries such as China or Japan, did not really believe that this cultural phenomenon or unexpected popularity would last long. It was actually made by chance. I will talk about it in a minute, but this very international success of Korean culture at that time in East Asia was made all by chance. So Korean culture industry or media industry were not fully ready to enjoy this unexpected success, as well as Korean government, who also did not believe that it could make Korea or South Korea as a nation, a brand, the national brand as a South Korea, kind of the broadly known to the other countries. I know that we do not have enough time to enjoy all this kind of video clips, so I would like to briefly review about these video clips, the TV series, rather than showing all of this. So in 1997, when I mean, even before 1997 or in the mid 1990, some Chinese local TV network aired the one Korean TV series called "What Is Love About?" Love All About, or 사랑이 뭐길래, originally aired by Korean TV network MBC. When it became successful in those local TV network in mainland China, Chinese nationwide TV network CCTV decided to broadcast this TV series all over the Chinese mainland Chinese territory, which made a huge success at the time in China in 1997. So it is considered as the very first Hallyu media product that made an international success, and also considered as the beginning of Hallyu. Because, of course, even before the very big success of this TV series, there were some TV series or there were some Korean musicians who made international success overseas, outside South Korea. But those success was more of the very kind of the exceptional cases that did not continue or did not make other Korean cultural products known to those international audience. It was more kind of the very like short-term or very individual success for some musicians or some TV series. But after this big success, What Is Love All About, or 사랑이 뭐길래, in 1997, other Korean TV series began to be introduced to China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, along with music and film, which made a continuous flow of Korean culture into those countries. Might be the reason why this cultural phenomenon was named Hallyu, or Korean wave, by Chinese media, that it was just like the wave continuously flown. So usually 1997 is considered as the very first year of this Hallyu phenomenon. So this year is 2022, so it has been almost 25 years. And the Winter Sonata, which made a big success in Japan and made this cultural phenomenon not only in Chinese-speaking regions or some limited part of East Asia, but made it as a kind of like general big success of a whole East Asia. And there were some musicians, K-pop musicians at the time named by the Chinese audience and East Asian media. such as the duo Clone or the boy band such as H.O.T. If you are interested in these early days of Hallyu, you can find their music videos or performance on the YouTube such as H.O.T. or Clone, and you may be surprised that the very music style or the performance or fashion, although it was more of like 20 or more years ago, it's not really, of course it is different because it was 25 years ago, but the general tendency or general style of those bands are not really different from what current K-pop musicians are doing, like great dance and like very unique clothes and music video style. And in China at that time, especially, the band H.O.T. was considered as the very symbol of new generation or new culture in the early 2000s because they were the first foreign band in China to gather more than millions of fans on the internet-based fan clubs. In the early 2000s, the internet infrastructure, the high-speed internet infrastructure was not fully available in mainland China as well as in other countries. But in South Korea, the internet, sorry, was fully available in the early 2000s, made supported by the government institutions, which made K-pop or other Korean pop culture to be delivered to the other countries easily and faster. And it became a kind of the symbol of the new era or the new digital culture in East Asia. So that was the very beginning of Hallyu, or Hallyu 1.0 as the first generation of Hallyu. Since the mid-2000, from the mid-2000 to the early 2010, usually it is considered as the second generation of Hallyu or Hallyu 2.0. This, you can see that while the first generation of Hallyu or Hallyu 1.0 is like between the late 1990 and the mid 2000, almost a decade. And the next generation, Hallyu 3.0, is also a kind of like decade or so, like 7 years or longer. As you can see that this period is a rather shorter than the previous generation or the next generation, because it was the transitional period for Hallyu. This period between the late 2000 and the early 2010, not only Chinese-speaking regions and some part of East Asia, but other East Asia also became kind of the big important regions for the Hallyu. And some Western European countries and North America, including United States, also, there was some like small number of people first to come to know about Hallyu and know about K-pop and other Korean media products. Interesting thing I should say about this Hallyu phenomenon began in the United States or other Western European countries at that time was due to the introduction by the East Asian immigrants and their descendants or are ethnic Chinese or ethnic Korean, Japanese, or other East Asian immigrants living in those regions. I mean, those East Asian immigrants or ethnic East Asian living in like Western European countries or in the United States already had been a fan of Hallyu or K-pop because their mother country people already enjoyed those K-pop or Hallyu products, and they also aware of the popularity of Hallyu in their own country. But in the United States, in Western European country, they did not know that. But those ethnic East Asian played an important role as a word of mouth to introduce Hallyu and Korean culture to their friends, their neighbors, and their families who did not know much about Hallyu or K-pop, but come to know its existence and come to fall in love with it. Since the late 2000s, in this second generation of Hallyu or Hallyu 2.0, it was K-pop that led this wave or this new cultural phenomenon, now followed by K-drama, this TV series, and interestingly, other media products such as TV shows, usually called as variety shows here in South Korea, but it's a bit different from American variety shows. The very Korean style or East Asian style variety show, including different aspects rather than the United States variety show. And the game also had played an important role in Korean culture industry. I should talk about game before moving on to next slide, because when you see the statistics of the exportation of Korean media products and cultural products, you can see that the it is game rather than K-pop or dramas or films that have been made more revenues or more profit than any other Korean media products or any other Korean media product. It means that game has been so successful, Korean game industry has been so successful in exporting their products to the world. But usually game has not been considered as a part of Hallyu, although there are some people who have been arguing that game is also a very important part of Hallyu, but it has not been considered as the very important part by many people, because although game has been successful in making like a lot of revenues or profit, it is a bit different from other Korean media products that is a part of Hallyu, such as K-pop or K-drama, for example, because when you listen to K-pop or when you watch K-drama, you will surely come to know that it is from Korea or it is from other country at least, although you do not know anything about Korean culture or Korean language, etc. It means that when you listen to Korean pop music or when you watch Korean TV drama, you are enjoying certain Korean cultural aspect, or I should say Koreanness. But game is a bit different. When you play game, I'm not pretty sure where there are like many people here who are still enjoying these PC-based games or smartphone-based game. But when you play game, you might not know where it comes from, and you might not really think about the very nationality of the game, right? Think about Super Mario, for example. It is from Japan, but when you see the characteristics of Super Mario, you cannot see any kind of Japanese culture in it or any kind of Japanness in it, right? It means that you are enjoying kind of the universal or general culture rather than Japanese culture when you play game from Japanese industry. It is almost the same with the Korean game industry, that although they have been really successful in making money, it might not mean that they are successfully making Korean culture let know to the others, such as K-pop or K-drama have been doing. So it was K-pop and drama than others that is an important part of the Hallyu 2.0 or the second generation of Hallyu. And I should introduce this technology, because it is not only the technology in the Hallyu 2.0, but kind of the technology that you can even still see these days, that many Hallyu fans or fans of K-pop have been gathering in internet-based media platform, mostly based on Web 2.0 technology. Web 2.0 technology means the certain websites emphasizing user-generated content based on the active participation and voluntary participation made by the users. It means that when you enjoy Hallyu or when you enjoy K-pop, as I told you previously, it may not mean only that you are listening to something or you are watching something. Rather, it may mean that you are participating in the culture by the thing that you are making. For example, when you search K-pop videos on YouTube, of course, there are tons of music videos provided by the entertainment agency, but there are other videos available made by fans themselves, such as the cover dance, cover song, or reaction video to newly released K-pop song or something. They were all made by the users actively and voluntarily, which means that just like I mentioned here, those teens, mostly those teens and 20 who are familiar to this technology or who are familiar to this participatory culture used Hallyu or K-pop as a tool, not just the entertainment, but not just the entertainment product, but as a tool to create their own thing or their own content. It is called as prosumer, that they are a producer as well as consumer, that they are consuming Hallyu products as well as producing something based on those Hallyu products or Korean media products, mostly based on voluntary participation. This is the important characteristics of Hallyu, that it is fan-based culture rather than totally given by the industry. So often those fans do not follow the way that are shown to us by private companies or like private companies or the culture industry. Whether they are making their own thing based on those Hallyu product or K-pop products. We are going to see later at the end of today's class. So at that time in the late 2000s and the early 2010, now people come to know the very possibility of Hallyu going global. So many private companies, culture industries, Korean culture industry began to aim at global market with more detailed and intended strategy than before during the first generation. And now Korean government also, who found the possibility of this promoting their culture, try to jump on this bandwagon, which was not really successful, but still they found that there will be a kind of new way thanks to the Hallyu phenomenon that made South Korea more recognized and more known to the other countries, and introducing other culture rather than the pop culture from the private sectors. So these were the musicians who made big success during this Hallyu 2.0 or the second generation, such as Big Bang, Karasu, Super Junior, girls' generations. Actually, there were certain like important moment in this Hallyu 2.0 before the Gangnam Style, that there were some Western European fans who asked Korean K-pop music industry SM to have more concert in Paris in front of the Louvre Museum. Actually, in 2011, there was a joint concert made by the musicians from a K-pop entertainment agency, SM Entertainment, but many European fans were not really satisfied with this concert because there was only one concert held by SM at the time. So they asked more concert, which made them together in front of the Louvre Museum for asking more concert. Interestingly, this gathering, which is called as a flash mob, is all made by themselves, not supported by the SM companies, not supported by Korean government, not supported by anyone. So it showed the important characteristics of Hallyu or the globalization of K-pop, that it has been made mostly by the fans themselves, not organized by the or directed by the government, by the companies, etc. I'm showing how they made their demonstration, I should say, in front of the Louvre Museum, the glass pyramid at the time in 2011, even before 1 year before the Gangnam Style. Before this flash mob, actually, some people in European countries or even in the United States knew that Korean culture became popular in East Asia, but they did not really expect that there were even fans in their own country, in their own continent of this Hallyu. But when these European fans made this flash mob in front of the Louvre Museum voluntarily, now people came to know that there were hidden fans under the surface who were enjoying Korean culture and who actually supported Korean culture, although mainstream media or mainstream like academia or did not really know it. And a year after this flash mob, which made Hallyu very visible outside East Asia, was Gangnam Style. Many of you may know, although Gangnam Style or the Psy, the singer-songwriter, may not the very typical K-pop musicians trained and educated by agency. Rather, he's a singer-songwriter and a producer as well, just like the many singer-songwriters that you know from United States music industry. But I should say that although he may not be the very typical K-pop musician, he actually paved the very path for other K-pop musicians to follow, which is like, and show certain strategies such as making very interesting music video or impressive music video that could go viral in the cyberspace that will make K-pop more popular in other countries thanks to the global prevalence of the internet media platform. And there were like dramas also and variety shows that became popular overseas, which made Hallyu more kind of the bigger cultural phenomena, not only based on TV series or not only based on music, but also on other cultural products from South Korea. Now I would like to talk about the third generation Hallyu between the early 2010 and the late 2010 or the early 2020, including East Asia, Europe, North and South America, Central Asia, Middle East, etc., etc. I should say almost all over the world. Although not everyone in the world may be a fan of Hallyu or K-pop or Korean cultural products. At least many people have heard Hallyu or K-pop, the term, or even have watched a brief part of some Korean TV series or Korean variety shows or music videos. And thanks to the big popularity of K-pop, now other Korean popular music genres such as indie rock or hip hop or Korean style R&B now are introduced to international audience. And interesting thing I should say is that thanks to the big popularity of K-pop and other Korean popular culture, now food, cartoon, cosmetics, and other things all are also beginning to go global. So still, it is mostly based on the YouTube social media webcast, such as the internet media platform. But since the mid and late 2010, now there is a new way of making Korean cultural products known to the international audience by joint production and remake. I'm showing this right a minute after. And still, it is mostly teens and 20, or usually called as Generation Z or Gen Z, who are born between the mid 1990 and the mid 2000s or the late 2000s. Interesting thing you can see here is that in the first generation in East Asia, it was the culture of the younger generation. And Hallyu 2.0 in the late 2000s, 10 or more years before, it was also the culture of younger generation at the time then. And now still it is a culture of younger generation, which means that Hallyu, although the age or the generation of Hallyu fans have been changed, still it has been enjoyed by younger generation of certain period, which makes Hallyu or the popularity of K-pop like could last like continue could be continued longer than expected. Hallyu 3.0 is like characterized as the active and passionate fans of great loyalty that I mentioned in the beginning, that some people even believe that those fans of big loyalty and very passionate, being passionate and active even can make other kinds of change or even social movement, even outside the cyberspace. Before that, they were only considered as like existing in only the intranet world, the cyberspace, and they were usually considered only the kind of like fans of certain pop culture. But now they are doing something even beyond the very boundary of pop culture, not only as a fans of certain musicians or certain TV series, but also as a big like a group of people, mostly the younger generation, who want something new, such as organizing social movement for like race discrimination and gender discrimination and even environmental issues. So under the name of the fan clubs, they donate a large amount of money to the organization of like organization to like organization against race discrimination or gender discrimination, or helping the environmental change issues, etc. So now Korean government as well as the Korean private companies begin to focus more on the international market these days, because the size of the international market for Korean culture industry have become bigger than before, even more important than their local market. Simply speaking, many K-pop K-pop entertainment agency are making more money from the foreign market rather than their local market. So Korean government also tried to use this big trend by promoting its national brand, introducing Korean traditional culture and Korean food, along with the Korean pop culture, and even using some Korean like musicians or actors and actresses as an ambassadors of like Korean pop culture and Korea as a national brand. So now people in South Korea begin to recognize the value of pop culture more and more than before. So these were the famous musicians in this Hallyu 3.0 era. And I told you that some people are expecting, even are making certain social movements made by Korean social movement, not even beyond this pop culture era or beyond the cyberspace, such as like when BTS showed their support for the Black Lives Matter movement, then the fan club of the BTS, which is called ARMY, donated a large amount of money to those organizations supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. But there's also kind of very sensitive issue when K-pop or Korean pop culture is going more and more global. It is sometimes often related to certain political or economic issue between countries, especially in East Asia. Some of you may know that the relationship between East Asian countries, although they are very close to each other, sometimes are not really well based on the historical conflict and other like political and economic country conflicts, such as the relationship between Korea and Japan, China and Japan, North Korea and South Korea, or China and Taiwan, etc. So I told you that there are many East Asian, not only Korean, but many East Asian musicians in K-pop scene, which means that it is almost kinds of very East Asian culture rather than just the Korean focused culture. Sometimes can make an issue because when there is a conflict between, let's say, China and Taiwan, then the Taiwanese member in K-pop band can be sometimes criticized or even sometimes can be blamed by the Chinese audience and can be a target for Chinese audience to attack him or her based on those like conflict between these two countries. And these are the joint ventures or exporting copyright, which is the very new trend in Hallyu 3.0, that not only exporting their own TV product or TV series, many like international broadcasting network try to cover or make a remake by purchasing the copyright or license from Korean TV industry to make their own. So just like the case that I'm showing that 아빠 어디가, which means Daddy, where are you going? Very popular TV series both in Korea and in East Asia was covered by Chinese TV networks named the very same name, Papa Chinar, or Produce 101, the very competition program made by the Korean TV, music TV network, music cable TV, Mnet, making the, which is the audition program to make a project K-pop band, is exported to Japanese TV industry to make their own Produce 101 in Japan. Even American TV industry imported the copyright from Korean TV industry to make their own thing, such as the Good Doctor, based on KBS TV series from Korea, Good Doctor, or The Masked Singer, based on the Korean TV variety show made by the MBC, which is Bongmyeon Gawang. So, as you can see here, now Korean culture industry is not only exporting their own cultural products, but also exporting the strategy or the system or the way how they make their own shows or their products to other countries, which has been learned by many other like culture industry, even including United States, to refer to the success of Korean pop culture. Lastly, I would like to make a conclusion with the new era of Hallyu, which is usually called as Hallyu 4.0. Some people are arguing these days that since the early 2020, we are now entering into the new age or new generation of Hallyu, which is Hallyu 4.0, which is very different from the Hallyu 3.0, that there are more collaboration between Korean culture industry and the international culture industry, such as Netflix with the Korean TV shows or TV production companies being offered lucrative deals, and which can be a doorway to international traction. And also there are like industrial collaboration between global content provider Apple TV Plus and Korean producing company Studio Dragon and the other American distributor Skydance Television, which showed how today's Korean cultural products such as TV series, films, or even music are made not only by the Korean culture industry, but also by the international collaboration, which can be a new chance and new opportunity for Korean industry to enter into the broader global market, but still there is a danger for Korean culture industry to become only a part of bigger global industry or global like economic system rather than maintaining their own cultural identity as being Korean, which means that when they are making more collaboration with the global TV network or global content provider or distributor, of course, they can make more money by appealing to the wider audience, but they might lose their own cultural identity, but only to make products that can satisfy the taste of those global audience rather than maintaining their own identity. So there is a kind of new possibility as well as unexpected danger for Korean culture industry who are entering into the new phase of the Hallyu. So this is the very end of my talk about the Hallyu, the definition of Hallyu and K-pop, and I introduced the history of Hallyu from Hallyu 1.0 to Hallyu 3.0 and the future of Hallyu kind of with the new possibility as well as the certain danger about losing their own identity. Right, so I can see that there are some questions in the Q&A box. So I would see the 3 questions that I got from the audience today. The first question I got is, what distinguishes K-pop from J-pop or C-pop? It is a very interesting question. And if I have more time, then I could compare K-pop with J-pop or C-pop. But to say briefly, K-pop is actually highly influenced, of course, by American pop music, especially hip hop and R&B, such as African American pop music, but also highly influenced by J-pop as well, especially the way how they make their business model and the way how they perform on the stage in front of the public. But it can be distinguished from J-pop because based on the very like way how they are recognized by the audience, especially J-pop is kind of the broader term, including the kind of like dance music, rock, and more broader term that is defined by Japanese themselves to show certain global characteristics of Japanese pop music. Well, K-pop is more of the music defined by global audience, as I mentioned. So the K-pop is more of the kind of the closely related to the global trend or the way how it is recognized by global audience rather than the local audience, although it has been enjoyed and loved by Korean local audience. So simply speaking, K-pop is more based on the globality or internationality, while J-pop or C-pop is more closely related to their local characteristics and their local audience. And the other question I can see here, which countries are sending students to South Korean? Oh, okay. Actually, in this summer, I just finished my international summer semester in one of I was invited actually by one Korean university to give some special lectures to international students who came to Korea to take summer classes. And it is not only just 1 or 2 countries. I can see that many different countries actually were in the class, of course, including United States, but also from many East Asian countries, Singapore, China, Hong Kong, Japan, but even other countries such as Netherlands, Belgium, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Russia, and Australia, and even from Morocco, interestingly. So it is not only from just United States or from East Asia, from others, but many different parts of the world. And yes, their motivation is actually made by those Hallyu thing. They come to fall in love with K-pop, Korean TV series, and Korean variety shows, and they come to wonder what other Korean cultural products that they could learn, and they came to have interest in learning Korean language and Korean culture by enjoying Korean cultural products before coming to college. So this K-pop or the Hallyu has contributed to this new like wave of like international students coming to Korea who want to know more about other Korean culture rather than Korean pop culture. Yeah, what role does Korean government play in promoting K-pop internationally? As I told you, this is the kind of thing that I actually have been asked by many international audience when I had this kinds of lecture or this kind of presentation in the conference or in the symposium. I should say, yes, Korean government did something, but not in promoting or directly supporting K-pop, K-films, or other like Korean culture industry. What they contributed is to make kind of the infrastructure, such as like high-speed internet all over the country earlier than other country, or make less censorship that actually existed in the 1980s or in the early 1990s South Korea, but was eliminated or was diminished by more democratic Korean government since the early 1990s, or may support to I supported to make a kind of the cultural, like the field of cultural exchange between Korea and other country which are not really known to Korea, such as some like African countries or Middle East countries, etc. But the role of the government in globalization of K-pop, let's say, or filmmakers or musicians should not be exaggerated or should not be overemphasized. They did not actually directly, for example, give financial support to K-pop or even promoting K-pop musicians. Rather, they try to use K-pop musicians, filmmakers, actors or actresses in promoting their own like national brand to show that Korea is such a like great country, etc., etc., which have not been really successful. So they have not been promoting K-pop or promoting other Korean culture, or like did a big help in making Hallyu bigger than larger. Rather, they tried. So I mentioned during the lecture, they tried to jump in the bandwagon to use Hallyu for their own political purposes, which had not been really successful so far. But these days, they try to change their attitude from like intervening the Hallyu phenomenon or supporting Hallyu to make kind of the more natural collaboration with Hallyu to make their national brand. Yes, it is interesting. Will majority of Koreans lose respect for BTS? Yeah, but if the military service is such a very sensitive issue, and I should tell you that since South Korea is still kind of still like longing for the reunification between North Korea and South Korea, right? So this mandatory military service for males in their 20s have been considered very important, and even even sometimes it becomes a kind of political issue even when a politician do not make his or her sons to complete the military service. So yes, I think that especially for the younger generation who also should do the military service in their 20s might be very disappointed when BTS might not do the military service based on the reasons. Oh, I know that there are some people who support BTS not to do the military service right now, but could do the military service later in their like mid-30s or something. But especially these days, the very issue of equality in South Korea is such a kind of big issue among the younger generation. So it might become a big issue when they might not go to the military service, which will make younger generation feel like very disappointed at the government policy. Okay. You mentioned about the stock price of their management company. I'm not an expert of the economy or the management, so I may not be able to say much about this issue. But in the case of the BTS, the entertainment agency Hybe supporting BTS and management of BTS, actually although they become bigger, they could grow based on the big success of BTS. Still, they have been depending much upon BTS for their own profit or their own revenue. Although there are some other musicians in that entertainment agency Hybe rather than the BTS, still the money that BTS have been made for the company is much bigger than any other bands in the very same entertainment agency. So that might be the reason why there is a big impact on the stock price of their management company high, because of the too much depending upon BTS so far. But so now they are making more girl bands or boy band and make their debut, preparing the next BTS. And South Korean, as I told you, when you see the statistics of South Korean economy, especially the economy, especially the field of culture industry, it is rather than K-pop, or it is rather than TV networks or others, but game or other industry, they make more profit or more money. But South Korean government or even media and others think this Hallyu or K-pop more important, not only because they are making big money, but because they are making South Korea known to the other, being recognized by many other countries who did not know much about South Korea, but now is come to know, or now can distinguish between North Korea and South Korea. Actually, they did not know where South Korea is located or North Korea is located, or they did not even distinguish between North Korea and South Korea, but now they can, thanks to the big success of the Hallyu thing. Oh, thank you for joining today's class and listening to my lecture. Thank you very much.